What is up, guys? Tony here, and today I'm going to be doing a video talking about airflow on gaming computers. This video is going to be done with the Thermaltake RXi Overseer gaming case with a EVGA 670 superclocked. I have a stock cooler on my CPU, and it's pretty much your standard gaming computer setup, no SLI. But I'm going to be trying to cover all types of cases and explaining to you how you should set up your airflow that'll best fit your setup. Now, you're going to need to do a little bit of research on what parts you have, but I'm going to try to cover all varieties of parts. If you have a special case that's much different than what I've talked about in this video, I would like you to comment below. Maybe I could do some research for you and give you a good idea of what you can do. Now, with this case, usually a lot of cases have flow that comes in through the front, comes in through the side panel. I have a fan right there, and then goes up and out this way, this direction generally, as an exhaust. The reason for this is because heat rises and goes upwards, obviously, that's what rises means. And obviously I have two 200mm fans up here. Having a few fans up at the top of your case will shoot all the air outside of your case, get all that hot air out. And of course the exhaust fan, which is the typical trademark of gaming computers and every computer for the last 10 years, having an exhaust fan right next to your CPU, that'll send all of the air out the back of your case if it's sort of looming around the CPU. I was trying to think of the word there. Now, with gaming computers, you have a few heat-making components. First off, you have the power supply. This is a unit that gets very hot, and that's one thing we're going to consider in this video, how to set up your power supply so it doesn't get too hot. Some cases have it at the bottom, some cases have it at the top. We'll get to how to set it up in a second. The next thing, obviously, is the GPU. These things get very hot, especially if you're playing a lot of high-quality games, and especially if you are overclocking it with a stock cooler. Then the next thing to consider, obviously, is the CPU. Those will get hot. And, of course, the hard drives. If you have mechanical hard drives, those will get hot, too. Now, usually, the best thing I'd recommend for a gaming computer is to look into all of the options for fans you can put in your case and try to pretty much use every single fan spot you can use unless you're going to do water cooling. Water cooling is usually the option that'll give you less noise, if you don't want a lot of noise. But if you want an air-cooled system, you don't want to deal with a reservoir, which is how a lot of new builders want to keep their system, like me. You want to just stick with air cooling, and I recommend filling every single fan slot possible, which I have done. I have two 200mm up there. I have a 120mm on the exhaust. I got a 200mm there, and I have a 200mm in the front there too. We'll turn on the machine in a second to show you what I'm doing in terms of airflow. Now, here's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to, first off, let's talk about the GPU. This GPU is the EVGA 670 superclocked, and it actually has an intake fan. If you can see that, can't really get a good angle on it, but there's an intake fan, and all of the air that goes through and across the GPU comes out of the back of the case. Now that means that this machine, this GPU, is going to take in air from the case and send it out, which means I want to make sure the air in this part of the case is as cool as possible. So the best way to deal with a GPU that has an intake fan is to try to have an intake on the side of your case, close to where the GPU is, which I have right here. You'll see if I bring this up, it lines up with the GPU just about perfectly. And you also want to try to have, maybe towards the front of the case, another intake fan like I have right there, that'll send more cool air towards the GPU. You basically want to have as much cool air going towards and into the GPU if you have an intake fan on your GPU. Most EVGA 670, 680 models have intake fans. Usually when there's two fans on your GPU, it's probably going to be exhausting the hot air into your case. And that's very common with a lot of MSI coolers, a lot of third-party coolers that you'll find for GPUs. So make sure you look into what your GPU does. You can look it up on forums. I'm sure you can find the information. If you're not sure, comment below and I'll help you out. Alright, so next up is the CPU. The CPUs on a stock cooler usually will intake air, and what happens is it'll try to cool it down that way, but some of the heat will be dispersed off of the CPU with a stock cooler. This is how a lot of people configure their machines with a stock cooler. I do recommend getting a third-party cooler. We'll get to that in a second. Now, any air that's coming off your CPU, you want to make sure you exhaust it somehow, very quickly. You don't want the airflow to shoot the CPU air throughout the whole case, because then you're going to be hotboxing your GPU, you're going to be hotboxing the power supply. So the best way to do this is to make sure you have your exhaust fan right next to your CPU. A lot of cases do not come with an exhaust fan. Just get a 120 mil exhaust fan, put it on the back. Make sure you fit a 120 mil. If it's more of an 80 mil, switch to that, etc., etc. You can look into your case specs online. Once again, if you're not sure, go ahead and look it up. Another way to make sure your CPU has good airflow is to look to see if you have any top mountings for fans. As you can see, if I take this off, I have two 200mm fans up here that are set to exhaust any air coming out of the CPU, and ultimately coming from the bottom of the machine too. If any air from the power supply or the RAM even, which does sometimes get hot, will all go upwards towards these top-mounted 200mm fans. So that's kind of an option. So usually with airflow, I try to tend to have all of the air coming out of the top near the CPU. I tend to have an intake towards the GPU and an intake towards the front. Now, if your GPU is if you're planning on having a GPU, or you have a GPU that is sending air out and is going to leave hot air all around this mess of hot parts, including the power supply and the GPU, you really want to make sure that you have an exhaust fan towards your GPU. So maybe if you have a side-mounted case fan, or you don't have one, go ahead and get one, and make sure it's set to exhaust. Send all the air outside of the case from the GPU. If you're doing that, you still want to keep this to exhaust too, but it's also a good idea just to have some exhaust here also, just to deal with any of the hot air looming around these two parts. Because when a PSU gets hot, the capacitors blow if you have a lower range power supply, and when the the graphics card gets too hot, obviously it's an overheat, and that's never a good thing. Now to hard drives. Let's talk a little bit about hard drives. Usually hard drives in cases will have some sort of cooling towards the hard drives. Always just have an intake towards the hard drives. Brush some cool air on there, let some cool air come in, and just cool down the hard drives. You want to go for a lower power fan. You don't want it to attribute too much to what's going on. This fan here, I think, is around 100 CFM, which basically allows this to be cooled without too much air coming out here and messing with this configuration here. But there is a little bit of air that kind of contributes to cooling the GPU a little bit. But it's mostly dedicated towards cooling these hard drives I have here, these mechanical hard drives. So yeah, you do want to have a fan by your hard drive. If possible, try to get a fan flow that creates a flow of air. Basically, when you're mapping out the flow of your computer's airflow, you want to make sure it kind of goes in some sort of a line. So mine's mostly like this, up towards there. You can go the opposite method and have some of the air coming in and going out towards the side of the case even, if you want to do something like that. But like I said, keep in mind you don't want to have too much air from the CPU, especially if you're overclocking, flying throughout the case. Now here's some recommendations for things you should do to keep your system's temperatures very low. First off, I'd recommend getting a third-party cooler. This does not mean water cooling. You can go online, you can go to Thermaltake, it's a great brand for getting these third-party coolers. And you just find a cooler that has maybe dual fans, a larger heat sink, and they're much more efficient for cooling your CPU. Another option is pre-filled water coolers, which are pretty much, you put a radiator on your 120 mil spot, and then you just put a simple water block on there that takes 2 minutes to screw in, and it's set up. You turn on the machine and it'll work. No need to set up a radiator or a pump or figure out how the tubing works or have any worries about the machine spilling water everywhere. So that's also another option, but you should go for a third-party cooler. The only reason why I have a stock cooler currently is because A, I don't overclock, and B, I'm still working on trying to figure out which third-party cooler is compatible with my system. That's my next point. Make sure the third-party cooler will fit in your system. You'll see here I have a big riser here. I have all of the RAM sticks sitting here with really high-up heat spreaders on this Patriot Viper 3 memory. And that makes it very difficult to fit a third-party cooler in here because sometimes these two parts here will interfere with the fans on the third-party cooler. So make sure you have a cooler that either sticks out a little bit more so you don't have the RAM interfering. Make sure you maybe you'll have two sticks of RAM, which will allow you to have it in dual channel on the right side so you have more room over here. Or maybe you just have low-profile RAM, which is also another good option. But make sure that your case will fit your third-party cooler. Also make sure it doesn't stick out too far so you can put the panel on. Now let's talk about really quickly before we end the video, the power supply. With a power supply, sometimes it's mounted on the bottom, sometimes it's mounted up here on the top, depends on how your case works, but every power supply has a fan. These fans are usually set to intake, and the point, not intake, my bad, exhaust, and the point of the exhaust on the power supply is to send all of the hot air being created, because it creates a lot of heat usually, out of the machine to prevent capacitors from getting too hot, and you want to make sure it has ventilation where it could send the air out. Now, in many cases, nowadays, it goes on the bottom, and there's usually a nice air filter. As you can see here, there's a nice little air filter. You can see that, a bunch of holes down here. You only want to do that if you have legs on your system. If your system doesn't have enough room down here, especially if you have a very tall carpet, my carpet's pretty short, you want to make sure that there's enough room for airflow under your case, because if not, you're going to hotbox your power supply. If the power supply is mounted up here, usually there's no exhaust on top for the power supply, so you want to let all the air go into the case, and then you want to make sure you have an exhaust fan that helps exhaust the power supply's heat. In this case, obviously I have a floor-mounted power supply. I have it going down. If you don't have enough room on the bottom of the case to have airflow out of this PSU, you can also turn it upwards and have it go towards the GPU, which is definitely a dangerous situation. I'm sure you guys know that. So make sure you have a powerful exhaust fan or an intake fan that blows a lot of air towards your GPU and PSU, because it does get pretty hot and you don't want to let those parts overheat. So there you go, that's just my quick video talking about my airflow and how it could apply to your airflow. If you have any comments or questions about your parts in your case, and if you want any advice on airflow, which I've done a lot of research on and I've worked with a lot in these machines, go ahead and comment below and I'll try to do some research for you or tell you from my experience what I know about airflow. If you have any other comments regarding anything else besides airflow, those are also welcome. And as always, like and comment and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys next time.